Okay, welcome to another tutorial. This is Nectarius from celestialtextures, and what is this video all about? Well, this video is all about FM, obviously. FM between two sine wave oscillators, and using the Virus Indigo for this, which is basically the Virus B with a 3-octave keyboard. And we're going to use VCommander, which is a VST editor that controls all the old virus synths, A, B, C, and their variants via MIDI. There's no audio transmission down the MIDI cable, obviously. You just control the synth via MIDI and its parameters, and just record through the analog outs as you would with any other synth. So this is the VCommander editor, and I've made a little FM patch, playful little thing with a bit of sample and hold modulation going into different places. Yeah, have a listen. So any parameter I edit in the software is reflected on the hardware, is mirrored on the hardware, and any knob I move on the hardware is mirrored on the software, which is cool. Alright, so let me take you from the beginning and show you and explain to you how I made this patch. I'm just going to initialize the patch. Yeah. So we're listening to two sawtooth oscillators, the default virus patch. So I'm going to take you through the basics of frequency modulation. I'm going to explain oscillator ratios. I'm going to have a play with the frequency modulation index or amount of the modulator oscillator to the carrier oscillator, and have a play with the pitch of the carrier oscillator, which is the oscillator that we're listening to. And the modulator oscillator is the one that's modulating the frequency of the carrier oscillator, which is again the oscillator that we're listening to. So we're going to bring the balance to oscillator 2. So we're only going to be listening to oscillator 2. So what we're going to do next is go to a sine wave from a sawtooth wave. And we're going to increase the frequency modulation index. And what is the frequency modulation index? Well, it's the amount that the frequency of oscillator 2, the carrier oscillator, is being modulated by oscillator 1. So oscillator 1 is the modulator, and oscillator 2 is the carrier. And I'm using a unipolar triangle wave to modulate the frequency of oscillator 2. So adjusting the frequency of the carrier oscillator, oscillator 2, has a huge impact on the sound. You get a lot more harmonics, a brighter sound, the higher the frequency goes. So I want to be able to play with the frequency modulation amount, but I want things to always sound in tune. I don't want them to go out of tune. And the easiest way to do that is to use sync. I am going to hard sync oscillator 2 to oscillator 1. So oscillator 2 is the slave oscillator, and oscillator 1 is the master oscillator. Oscillator 2 is hard synced to oscillator 1. So no matter what the frequency modulation amount, things never go out of tune. So simply by playing with the pitch of the carrier oscillator, I can alter the timbre of the sound without using the filter at all. I'm not using the filter at all. I'm just using frequency modulation to add harmonics. And in this patch, the modulator oscillator, oscillator 1, is the oscillator that gives us the pitch. This is the oscillator that we tune to the fundamental of the track or some note in the scale. So going into the LFO section, I'm going to make LFO 1 into sample and hold, then I'm going to make LFO 2 into sample and hold as well. I'm just going to clock the LFO to the track BPM, and I'm going to use envelope mode because I want at every note trigger, when I hold the note down, I want the sample and hold value to stay there until I release the note and hit a new note. So this is very similar to when you phase retrigger an oscillator. It's basically the same thing. You hit a key and you lock the phase of the sample and hold value to the next value, and for as long as you hold the key down, you are at that value. I'm going to increase the frequency modulation amount. So now LFO2, the sample and hold waveform, is controlling the frequency modulation amount. It's as if I go to the oscillator section, I go to oscillator 2, and I basically automate this knob. The frequency modulation amount is controlled by LFO2. So once again, LFO2 sample and hold waveform is controlling the frequency modulation amount of oscillator 1 to oscillator 2. So next thing I'm going to do is go to LFO1, which is again a sample and hold waveform, and I'm going to have it modulate the pitch of oscillator 2, which is the carrier oscillator, the one we're listening to. So that's my second layer of modulation. Which basically gives extra bubbles, like it adds a second layer of randomness into the amount of harmonics and high-end information that you're going to get. So here's a 16th MIDI trigger. We have a click on the attack. If we back the attack off a bit, we can get rid of some of that click. And let's modulate the release of the envelope that controls the amplifier. So in the modulation matrix, we go to assign LFO1, sample and hold waveform, to the release of the envelope that controls the amplifier. And the cool thing is that everything we've done so far doesn't involve a filter. We're not using a filter at all. Everything, all the timbral variety has been a straight result of frequency modulation and not using the filter at all. So what are we going to do next? Well, obviously we're going to do some more random modulation. We're going to assign LFO2 to the cutoff of filter 1. It's a bit dull because, yeah, it's mixed in the middle. I want to hear only filter 1 and not hear filter 1 with filter 2 mixed, because filter 2 is a low pass and I just want the high pass. So now we're only listening to the high pass filter. There's a MIDI file, there's a 16th MIDI trigger, triggering the virus. Let's add some delay. Some feedback. Alright. And yeah, this is a tutorial, so you can hopefully understand the relationship that two oscillators have when one is the carrier and one is the modulator, and the carrier is being frequency modulated by the modulator. If this was a lot to take in one go, watch the video again. The good news is that if you understand this, the same technique applies to any synth, digital, analog, plug-in, modular. The same techniques apply to any other synth. So if you understand this, you're going to be able to sit in front of any synth and recreate this patch and get each synth's character. Because different synths have different oscillators, different filters, different modulation sections. So, you know, the virus is a really good synth to learn on. I mean, it helped me a lot, and it's a great starting point. So this is the tutorial about basic FM synthesis. Hopefully you enjoyed watching it, and see you next time. Cheers.